What's up, Wallback Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of the Alto Knights, the new gangster crime drama film from Barry Levinson, starring Robert De Niro in a dual role as famed mafia members Frank Costello and Vito Genovese. The Alto Knights is a really strange phenomenon here just because it's Robert De Niro, in his 80s at this point, once again returning to the gangster genre. Of course, Robert De Niro, the greatest actor in this genre, of course, starring in the Holy Trinity from Scorsese with Goodfellas, Casino, and The Irishman, as well as The Godfather Part 2, The Untouchables, Scorsese's Mean Streets. I mean, he's the gangster goat, obviously. And yet, it's so strange that De Niro decided to go back to the well once again because The Irishman in 2019 was such a perfect send off and was like the best kind of end cap for all of this because it was a movie about the passage of time and like growing older and how those things happen, right? Like it was a great end stone. It made sense as like the final chapter. And yet De Niro, who is keeping busy, he's a working actor still, of course, on Zero Day on Netflix this year as well. He's keeping busy. But why he would want to go back to this is just so curious, especially with someone like Barry Levinson, who also up there in age and hasn't exactly had his fastball as a director in some time. Also in this mix is the writer Nicholas Pileggi, who of course wrote the book that was adapted into Goodfellas. Again, why would Pileggi think he had anything else to say? And this is a movie that had been in like various stages of development, at least conception wise, for many years, and reportedly was greenlit by Warner Brothers because David Zaslav is friends with Pileggi and wanted to make it happen. So this movie got made, for a non small sum, close to $50 million, with marketing factored in, of course, too, and is the latest Warner Brothers bomb. Unfortunately, the movie has not performed well. And I just don't think it really adds a whole lot to this genre. And the movie itself just isn't good enough to stand out at all, even if you take the De Niro, the Pileggi out of it all. Robert De Niro playing a dual role in the Alto Knights is not a problem. He's able to differentiate the two performances. The makeup and the prosthetics also do a good job of making them feel like two different characters. The problem is the Alto Knights has a really bad script, exposition for days, tons of really poor voiceover, and just surface level storytelling. There's just not a lot here to be excited about, especially when you compare it to the Pantheon entries that De Niro has previously been a part of. The intrigue of telling real life mafia stories is certainly appealing, but the Alto Knights is adapting stuff that was more famously shown to us in previous movies as well. There's just really not a lot going on here, and it's just too surface level and thin for what it does focus on to really be excited about. When I think of the plot, I mean, this movie, shows us the McKellen hearings with Frank Costello testifying, volunteering to testify before Congress, whereas all the other mafia members who got subpoenaed pled the fifth, of course. But this is something that, of course, was direct inspiration for Michael Corleone testifying in The Godfather Part 2, right? So you already have a better version of this scene versus what the Alto Knights does. And yes, this is like trying to tell the real story, blah, 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 but it's such an inferior, thing on screen. Frankly, I think it would have been really cool if maybe they focused on something like the Appalachian meeting, of course, where the mafia get found by the police at this big meeting. That's portrayed in the Alto Knights, something that hasn't really been adapted in any of the big gangster movies. It was referenced in The Irishman, of course, but like, yeah, I mean, that was something that I thought was probably the most interesting aspect of the movie, even if the movie just kind of runs and skips through everything. The Vito Genovese performance is supposed to really invoke a Joe Pesci performance. And again, I think De Niro does a good job of differentiating that. But, Frank Costello, not the most intriguing person to be with because he's not exactly in the mix and involved with a lot of action over the course of this movie. He's more of a sedentary private guy. So we're watching him watch TV and things of that nature. It's just not as compelling as it could have been. And I think I always feel like the gang war stuff, that's always like undersold. It's nice to see Michael Rispoli, of course, a veteran to these types of roles, of course. Cosmo Jarvis is Vinny the Chin, kind of wasted, obviously. That character, Vincent Gigante, was like not as high up in the mafia at that time, but I would have liked a little bit more given how awesome Cosmo Jarvis was on Shogun, for example. I'll always be into gangster movies, and I'm really into like American mafia history. I just find it so fascinating. Obviously, like I'm from New York, so like maybe I have extra interest in it compared to the normal person, but I find it really cool. And I think telling like great like adaptations of real life gangsters is something that maybe you could still do one day. You know, like I think of the Paramount Plus series, The Offer, and how disappointing that was. You know, I think there's a lot of bad entries in this genre, and obviously we have all the legendary stuff from Scorsese and Coppola at this point that I think you got to really have a take, you got to really point of view, or at least have a really good script to even attempt this at this point. And even if you're doing it without legends like Robert De Niro, you know, like I just you're up against such monumentous works. Maybe the answer to this is that you don't continue to do, you know, Italian mafia movies. Maybe the future is in telling crime movies based on other characters, other crime factions across the globe. That's probably the future of this genre, right? I mean, the American mafia, specifically the New York mafia, has been really significantly adapted, right? Even Capone, for that matter, we've gotten a lot of Chicago, right? So I think there's still room for stuff, but maybe you're gonna focus on Asia. You're gonna focus on Latin America, Europe. You know, Den of Thieves went to Europe with its sequel. You know, I'm not sure, but yeah, the Alto Knights. It's a disappointment, and I kind of wish De Niro didn't bother, just because. I mean, the reason to do this movie after The Irishman just doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to begrudge the man for working, but he's staying pretty busy. It's not like he was desperate for a role and took this on. He's been getting tons of work, so like you just didn't need to do this. But yeah, let me know, what did you think of the Alto Nights? Is there anything you liked about it more than me? Let me know. And for more movie reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time.